You missed it, and we'll get into our discussion this morning.
Naambia ya kwamba nyinyi watu ya Bomet, watu ya Rift Valley ati mumechoka na ndugu yangu. Hapana. Acha mimi niseme ukweli wangu, wale wanaandika si wako hapa. Kwani si ni mimi ndio nasoma au nyinyi hamusomi hiyo gazeti? Nataka leo mniambie ya kwamba yale ambaye tunasoma ni ya ukweli au ni ya uongo.
All right, and he went on to say, this is something he said before, so he was like, yeah, I'm just reiterating, I continue to hold my position, meat wrappers is what the dailies are, and of course that then extends to the entire media. Joining me in studio this morning, Patrick Gadara, who's a communications consultant, he's a blogger, also a cartoonist, and you'll find his work in the Daily Nation. Thank you for joining us. Also, Mr. Ngujiri Wambogo, it's been a while, political commentator.
Yes.
It's good to see you. So first, from the face of it, your thoughts on what the president said on the media. And this is not the first time we're hearing him and his deputy talk about the media that way.
Well, I think it's a fact that, that this administration has a love-hate relationship with the media. And I think it's, first, notwithstanding the merits and demerits of what he's saying, what we are seeing is the media has a platform that the executive believes they use to bash them. So the executive, every time they get a platform, bash them back. So we're just seeing a running feud between the executive and the media being now represented in that particular platform, in my opinion.
Patrick, don't you think there's a danger when you have the head of state talking like that, having that kind of contempt, that this could be an attitude that then sinks to other officers? Because look at the beating of the journalists. It's an attitude that they have that, hey, you know, these are... So do you fear that this could be something that trickles down and has worse repercussions, and now people will laugh about it, but it could mean something more serious?
Yes, I think that there is a big danger when government essentially sees the media as the enemy. I think over the period of its existence, the current administration has essentially initially tried to cultivate the press, and I think now we're in a phase where essentially they're being seen, or the press is being painted as having an agenda that is anti-government. I personally don't think that that's the case. I think it's more reflective of an intolerance to alternative discourses, to dissent, that we have seen being the case with this government. When you speak of the beatings of journalists and stuff, and look at the statements that came in the aftermath of that beating, they're essentially blaming the journalists for their own assault. You know, tells you that they don't really take seriously their mandate to protect and defend the freedoms of the press. I mean, we've seen also with the laws they've tried to pass. So, I would say it's not so much. I mean, there is an element of media versus government, but I think it is a job of the media to keep the government on its toes, and this is a government that really doesn't like the media doing that job.
Okay, and Gunjuri, by virtue of the president even visiting Bomet, isn't that because there's real concern that the rift is widening in that region for his deputy, and that Governor Ruto has really just been giving them a hell of a time? So he's deflating, to one hand, use the media, but by virtue of his visit, it's just to go to testify to the fact that they're worried about the going-ons there. It's not the media playing up anything. They realize it's a challenge, it's a problem.
No, there is a challenge in Bomet. I mean, I don't think anybody can wish that away, or fly it away. But I think also one of the things and I'd like to pick something that Katara said. I don't know at what point we developed a position that media's role is to keep government on its toes. I thought, because
what is the role?
Media's role is to inform us. Media's role is to is a communications platform. We get to know what is happening around the country.
So inform without analysis, without challenging, without questioning, because inform would mean to just say it as it is. What Gadara criticizes of just simply saying things as they are, not creating context, perspective, helping people.
All that is information, by the way. Eh?
Okay.
Context, because what I expect the media to do, and I'm sure we're going to get into an article I wrote this week about the fact that all of a sudden, and this is something I have actually watched gradually happening, despite the fact that I'm also a consumer and a producer of media.
Right.
We are actually getting to the point where we are now getting media making news. They take a position, they support that position, and they push that position all the way to the end. And this, maybe our local media hasn't got into it yet, but I want us to look at something that happened with the Al Jazeera journalist who was in Egypt for 400 days, who came out and is now suing Al Jazeera because he's saying, you guys took a particular position in Egypt that caused me harm. So you see, we are getting editorial policies being set. And even here in Kenya, you can actually tell media houses based on this particular media house, what the 3 lead stories or the 4 lead stories on a news item, tell you what particular policy line they have vis-a-vis government.
Really?
And this is a problem. And you see, it's starting to become apparent and obvious that if you're looking at a particular media station, you know they have a problem with government. This one has a particular problem with the deputy president. This one has a particular, and that is wrong. We are no longer, and that's why I'm saying we've reached a point where the media is taking positions and then looking for news to support those positions.
And it's one way to look at it as, and I'll let you speak shortly, you know, that they're looking at it as this media house has a problem with so-and-so or the government. Or you could look at it, these people just have problems that are being shared.
Yes, I mean, see,
so
but we all know that in any given time, for example, even in the newspaper, an editor has to choose what stories to run with. You have a lot more stories than you have space on the newspaper. So you actually choose what stories to put in the newspaper. And one of the things I've always made fun is that the fact that you see a story in the newspaper doesn't mean it was the most important story to run from a particular area, a particular region, or a particular topic.
So it's a prominence.
It is a prominence. And,
okay.
and why?
And why?
First thing, I think the media exists, and the reason why over a fairly long period Kenyans fought to free the press from controls and constraints that are imposed by government is because the media exists to protect the public interest. You know, and it's a fact that one of the biggest dangers to public interest is from the people who wield power. You know, when we speak of the media as the fourth estate, we are seeing them as part of a system of checks and balances. Now, the problem we have today is we've got an administration that doesn't want to be checked, that doesn't want its foibles, its follies being aired out in the public. In fact, I would go further and say that we have an administration that believes in wrongdoing without wrongdoers, that we can have problems, but not people we blame for those problems. So that they always say, don't point the finger, give us solutions. Yet the people who are the problem, who are causing the problem, are sat squarely within government. And this is something the government knows. On issues from security to poaching, to procurement of laptops, which is back in the news again, you know, and stuff. We know the problems exist and within the government itself, but it doesn't want to admit this. It doesn't want to take action against its own officers.
Yeah, so there's a government, Ngunjiri, that does not want to be criticized. Dissenting voices, they look for ways to shut them up. Would you agree with that analysis?
No.
This is a government that is what?
There's something that happened that we haven't analyzed critically. When John Kerry was in town, he went to visit Boniface Mwangi. And you know, and Kerry, you guys, who called him Terry? Some media guys called him Terry.
Someone called him Terry?
Yes.
That was something in the nation. I'm not very sure it was genuine, but
they called him Terry. So when Kerry went to see Boniface Mwangi, and he made an interesting comment. He said that he asked the president, he mentioned that he was going to see Boniface Mwangi, and the president encouraged him to go and do it. And I was thinking about it later, and I was realizing, you see, the existence of Boniface Mwangi and certain civil society actors, and certain media practitioners, including the Citizen Weekly, is actually an example of the fact that we cannot directly say that this government hates being criticized. Of course, nobody likes being criticized. So you're always going to get a bit thin-skinned if somebody is always criticizing you. But then it's also important for us to debunk a myth, again, that I've seen Radara trying to perpetuate. Media does not protect public interest. Media protects media interest. You see, we need to accept something about media. Media is a powerful, powerful force in society.
Correct.
We keep talking about media as if it's some random guys in the street. Media actually makes things happen. Shapes things to happen. A brilliant example is Nancy Baraza. Nancy Baraza left office as the Deputy Chief Justice because of media. They put pressure on her to the point where it was not tenable for her to actually
She didn't leave because she pulled a gun on somebody?
Boss, people have done worse things in this country than what Nancy
but
Baraza still...
did.
No, let's be very honest.
This is a Deputy Chief Justice.
Guy, Radara,
at
let's
the
be
time,
honest.
people would argue, at the time when she was leaving office, the integrity clause was still being taken very seriously. Now it's completely been watered down. So again, to say it's just the media.
We have to accept, we need to stop assuming that the media is a public interest tool.
But
Media,
it is supposed to.
It is supposed to be. In fact, when he talks about the fourth estate, in the traditional historical aspect of the fourth estate, that's what it's supposed to be. But we have seen the media, not just here. So let me not just point fingers at the Kenyan media. Across the world, we have Rupert Murdoch.
Yes.
The guy, is he the Jew from Australia who runs newspapers in Britain?
In the UK, yes.
In the UK. Taking positions and making
and which is what I want to ask you. What
careers.
do you think Kenya should now go to that direction where now we are just clear that this media house, this is
in fact,
we are pro
I wish
or
we could.
Anti.
I wish we could, because what we are having now is media that shows it's non-partisan, while it actually is not non-partisan. So we have a situation where media keeps presenting itself as non-partisan, neutral arbiters of public interest. Well, that's not what they're doing. Particular media houses have positions. Towards the last election, we had some media houses associated with particular candidates, and they actually pushed it, pushed their agendas.
But
why don't we just
clear.
agree? But you see, they were never clear. It was always, even when they ran the news, they didn't say that we have our position. So they'd always show you the bad news about the person they didn't like and the good news about the person they were supporting. Okay. Which is their right, yes, but let's be honest. Let's say,
be honest about it.
I'll say one thing. I think Onjiri fundamentally misunderstands how the media would work.
I mean,
or how actually the entire system should work. It's in pursuing its own interests, that the media then protects the public interest.
How?
Let me explain.
Are you then relating its interest to public interest always?
Let me give you an example. I don't know whether any of you remember sometime in the early 2000s when the People newspaper broke the KWS corruption story some time back. And before that, they had, essentially they were being treated as a rag paper. Now, it's in being seen as credible, it's in being able to break this story that the media then builds up its own profile and makes more money. Nobody would buy the Nation or the Standard if they thought they were being sold hawking. They really wouldn't. So the media, in pursuing its own interest, pursues a public interest. And then here's the other thing. When you look at a system of checks and balances, even within government, Parliament has its own agenda. Government has its own agenda, as in the executive has its own. It is not, when we talk of protecting it, it's in the clash between them that one doesn't allow the other to take over, to dominate, to be able to do its shenanigans. We create a system of competing interests within it. That's how it works.
Say on the digital migration question.
So for example, digital migration question, I actually thought the media was very wrong on this.
But then you're saying it was pursuing then its interest, and you're saying then that relates to public interest.
The system isn't perfect. It won't always. And the media does go wrong in places. And we see the government standing up.
So then you cannot say in pursuing its interest is pursuing
but that's what I'm saying.
It's
the system isn't perfect. It's not that the media are the good guys and the government are the bad guys. That's not how it works. But there's a clash between government and media, and that should be encouraged, I think, so that the media is always critical of what government is saying. Is always, by critical I mean it doesn't simply take it as face value what it is told. It interrogates it, and also in pursuit of its own. I think to go back to the discussion about how this particular administration has treated the press. I mean, we've seen them. I mean, if all of you remember what happened in 2013, just after they got in, there was a huge attempt by government to woo media, and media for a very long time, I would say, seemed very enamored of the duo in State House. Yeah. And I was critical of that at the time, because it seemed to simply regurgitate what it was being told and not to question it. And now we're seeing it going to the other side, which I like, you know, where it actually now starts stands up and asking questions.
Now you can ask questions. We need to move.
As we move on,
yes.
2 points I would like to emphasize that Gadara has made. One is that we don't have good and bad between media and government. It's important for that point to come out clearly, because a lot of the times the media presents itself as a good guy and the government is a bad guy.
Bad guy.
So we have a situation where media is allowed to criticize government. But every time government criticizes media, media catches feelings. Saying, you can't say that. You can't say newspapers are only good for whatever. That is executive criticizing media the way they know how. This is a position. It's like when Kibaki used to call people that name that we will not use here, or Kenyatta had another name that he used to use. Uhuru has picked this one. Decided as far as he's concerned, every time he has a problem with newspapers, he say newspapers are for...
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem.
So we need to agree that we can have criticism
and
coming from media.
Too many feelings.
Don't catch feelings. If media is criticized, don't catch feelings.
Dennis Itumbi, who's a director digital, unless things have changed since, tweeted yesterday how media covers Raila Odinga. He's mentioned in corruption tape, they say drugged. Then Raila is clean, hashtag. Ruto is on tape, but hey, guilty. Do you get that sense? I'll start with you, Gadara, that Ruto has been, there's been a number of stories around him and corruption, many allegations, okay? So he's saying that the media is being unfair, that when you're talking Raila is being dragged, like this is just a mess, that, you know, he should not even be there in the first place.
Well, in the immediate issue where he's referring to these tapes, I do think, I mean, the moniker that I was dragged is up, because and the facts of the much of an allegation is that somebody contributed money to Raila's campaign, if I'm not wrong. You know, I don't think there's a suggestion that, as has been made in the case of Ruto, that there was any corruption involved in this. You know,
his direct involvement, yeah.
You know, yeah. So in that sense, I think the idea that his name in this particular case was dragged in, I think, is fair.
As a whole?
As a whole, I think not just with Raila, but I think across the board with most of this, most of our elite in power, the media has been fairly unwilling to point fingers and actually to detail the extent and the history of their involvement in corrupt deals. I'll give you an example. Right now we are all about the Moi Referral Hospital. You know, nobody talks about, for example, the 2008 maize scandal. You know, and I think that scandal was really telling, because it was the first thing the Grand Coalition Cabinet, where all these guys were, you know, did. It got in its first sitting, you know, put in a scheme that is essentially designed, according to PwC, to fleece the government, you know, and essentially took food out of the mouth of Kenyans. You know, the very guys who a few months before they had put to odds fighting, they were now stealing from them, and by the time they were done, a third of the country was starving. Nobody goes back and asks, who was ever held accountable for that?
All right, and we've moved a bit. Let me first come back to Ngunjiri on the same question. Unfair treatment in coverage on these two personalities, politicians?
Yes. I mean, it's quite clear. And I don't know whether you can actually blame media for this. This has been my experience with just following media over the years. They tend to have people who sell the papers, for example, or who sell news. Raila Odinga is one of them over the years, and Ruto has become another one of them. And unfortunately, Ruto has become the person who sells news negatively. So every time there's a negative allegation about him, it will be breaking news. It will be a lead story somewhere. It will be, it's like they're feeding a public desire to have a situation where the deputy president looks bad. There seems to be a public desire for that to happen. Now, on the other side, we have Raila, who over the years has, and having worked in his campaign,
I'll take it back to the reverse. A desire on situations where the deputy president looks bad, or does the person keep having situations that are ours and have been covered?
You see, this is my problem. We must run away from a single narrative perspective. We tend to have single narratives about people. You cannot tell me that everything the deputy president does is bad. But no, let me finish. You can't tell me sincerely that he wakes up in the morning and the entire day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, that the only thing he does is bad. So we must have a situation where we have a balanced coverage. He's got negative things he's done, he's got positive things he's done.
I'm sorry.
You don't get positive things
Let him respond to that.
You get what I'm saying? While on the other hand, we can't tell me that everything Raila does is good. We don't have a balanced coverage.
Again,
so we're only getting good things about Raila and bad things about the deputy president. So, and it's just not natural that somebody, there's good in even the worst of us, and there's bad in even the best of us.
I would entirely disagree that we've got a situation where it's only good said about Raila and only bad said about Ruto. Anybody who's followed the press from 2013 at least would know that very many times the media has been portraying the duo. In fact, they've compared Ruto and Uhuru to Obama, you know, to how we're doing things afresh, new, you know, and things. You know.
Uhuru
now, let me finish. The fact that they point out the wrongs that they did do, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that hogs the news. Because essentially, the wrongs that are being pointed out are so inimical to our interests. I mean, think about it. Of all the things that this guy has been tied to, you know, the Hustlers Jet thing, you know, the Weston Hotel and whatever. Now you've got this MTRH whatever scandal. You know, these are the people sitting in the seat of power. You know, they're the guys who are directing
His
things.
argument is there must be some good, and we
There
never
must
see
be
the
balance.
good covered.
Again,
There must be balance.
Again, here's the thing, is I don't think, and when you talk of balance, I don't think that the fact that we report what Ruto's involvement in a scandal means that tomorrow you have to dash around and look for something nice that he said. You know, I think that would be the entirely wrong thing to do.
But you dashed around and found something negative.
No,
but you dashed around and found something negative.
We did not dash around. Those person who went to the PIC and recovered. That would be the argument.
Don't forget.
However, when it's back to back, I get his point.
I mean,
and that
sincerely,
is when it's
back
constant.
to back, consistently.
Well, when they had it good at the beginning of 2013,
no, but let's be honest. Let's be honest.
A bromance.
No, let's be honest. Ruto has never benefited from the bromance. Uhuru has. Ruto never did.
Oh, I would disagree with
Ruto
that.
never did. In fact, if you follow the entire media coverage, even when the media was enamored with this couple, it was always Uhuru and Ruto. Even the bromance of them in the t-shirt, it was never, Ruto has actually never benefited
Well,
from
Uhuru is the president, Ruto is his deputy.
I'm trying to make the point that
nobody
Ruto
just mentioned Uhuru. You know, Ruto benefited very much from this coverage. You know, and my point is this, is we shouldn't be thinking that it's the media's job to balance out coverage when it is covering people who are said to be stealing.
That is my point.
Okay.
My point is not even about the issue about stealing and everything. My point is, if you're going to run a particular policy, editorial policy on an issue, let's stop pretending we're being non-partisan about it, which is what Kadara keeps trying to make the point, that it's about public interest, it's about independence. No, let's agree we have a problem with this guy, and we're going to tell you, we're going to tell you why we have a problem with him.
Okay. Let's move on.
What
Time.
if you have a problem with stealing? I mean, that's...
and those are allegations that,
precisely.
that need
that tends to forget to...
That the allegations? All right, let's move on because you wrote an article. I don't know if you got to read it. Page 22 in the Star yesterday.
He was a main actor in it.
He was?
Yes, I was part of the organizers.
So you're part of the people that should be getting the flag for this. But let me read part of what you said. Hopefully I can just get it real quick. And here we go. No, not this one, this one. Okay, so this experience which we'll share with our viewers shortly, for those who did not read, you say there is some truth to what government claims or attempts by some media houses to not just report news, but to also make news and even shape public opinion around news they make. This is not media freedom, this is manipulation of media freedom. So this is just part of the article that was written by Ngunjiri Wambogo. He writes for the Star. So Ngunjiri, first talk to us about briefly what happened and what got you to this conclusion.
Okay, so...
and we want to also welcome Latif Eric, who's just joining us. Sorry for the traffic.
Well, I've swum up to here. So.
You have swum, huh?
I had to change in the car from yesterday to here.
Yes.
You're from the office? Oh my world.
It's crazy.
It's insane, yeah?
It's crazy.
And we'll get to how we are covering and looking at that story shortly. But Ngunjiri.
Yes, so I had this interesting experience last week. So I get invited for a live TV show that was running at the French Cultural Center. That was organized by Buni TV, which is associated with other and cartoonists.
Well, it's actually, I mean, Buni TV had contracted me to help them with organizing. It was not just that event, but it was a wider.
So I show up, I had earlier in the morning talked to the guy who was going to be moderating. I'd been told I was going to be in the panel. So I show up, the discussion was security versus, it was freedom versus security.
No, freedom and security.
No, that changed in the middle of the show.
No. Actually, it was in every
What had you been informed? Let
him
share his side of the story.
Okay, fine. Come on.
I even have the paperwork. Okay. It was actually security, it was freedom versus security.
That's what you'd been informed.
That is what I had been invited for. In fact, that is what was running in the beginning. Then somewhere in the middle of the show, Christian Turner, the UK commissioner, suggested it needs to be changed, and it got changed. Right. But then, so I get into the show, I get into this event, and it's, well, it's got a good audience, very, very heavy on civil society and international community. And the panel, I had been informed about the panel, was going to have Atsango from Kenya Human Rights Commission, it was going to have Khalid from Haki Africa, it was going to have another Mzungu called Andrew Franklin, Andrew, yes, who is an American who does security. And then it was going to have a guy from IPOA. And then we had actually, because it was, you see, we keep, it's clear, the particular people have particular positions. So one of the things that had been suggested is that we need to have at least 2 other people on the panel who don't have directly anti-government positions.
Yes.
And we had been told that was going to happen. So it was going to be myself and either Njeri Thorn or Mwenda Njoka, who is a spokesperson for Interior. So we get there, and I think I'm the first person, and I'm put up on the stage, and I'm mic'd. Those seats are empty. And then before the program begins, I'm called off the stage, and then we have a conversation. And Gazara, actually, since he's here, I can say that because he was the one who was telling our group, no, we need a direct government official, not somebody associated with government. In that seat. Okay. And part of the conversation was, so you have 4 people who have taken positions against government, and then you want one person who's got a government position. Yeah. Is that actually a fair panel? So the argument was, no, there are no sides here. In fact, IPOA is government. And I think IPOA has taken government to court on some decisions. How does it become government? You know? And it went back and forth. So at some point, I and Mwenda decided, look, we're not going to be part of this. So what happened is that Nation, who are running that show, kept an empty seat on the stage for the entire duration of the program to show how they had invited government and government refused to come. And in fact, at some point of that show, my name and Mwenda were mentioned as people who had actually walked away from the show. And for me, the issue was, first, nobody gave the context of why we walked away from the show. And because the media had this platform that they owned, they could actually say whatever they wanted about why we were not part of that show. And it did not necessarily have to be the truth of why we had not been part of that show.
Okay. Got that.
Okay. First, let me explain the context of how this debate came about.
Briefly.
Yeah, I'll try to be very brief. We, at the beginning of this month, were having a cartoon exhibition on the themes of the interaction between freedom and security. And the question that we were looking to answer was one that has been raised by the government itself, which they have claimed that the Constitution is the problem when it comes to security, that it constrains governments too much, that it gives us too much freedom. And we're simply asking whether this is a tenable position and whether we have other problems. Now, on the particular day,
yes,
you know, the first thing I would admit is there was confusion as to who would have been on the panel. It wasn't just with regard to Bujiri, but there were other people who were turned up who apparently had been told, because I later discovered we were running 2 channels of communication, which was totally our fault, where others had been told they'd be on the panel, you know, and they weren't. And I mean, for now, I really want to apologize for that, you know. But that said, the point of the discussion was to articulate these positions. We weren't approaching it from a point of view where it's adversarial, that we are calling people to the panel because they have anti-government positions. No, because they've got something to contribute. So we've got somebody from Haki Africa representing a community that has been branded as problematic when it comes to security. We've got people from civil society to discuss issues of freedom. We've got a security expert there. We've got IPOA, which for the life of me, I don't understand how somebody would argue IPOA is not part of government, seeing that it is set up by government, you know, and stuff. And we had an extra seat for somebody from government to come. Now, we weren't looking for PR people, personnel, you know, and that was one of the things that initially in our discussions to set up this, we had said we wanted a policy guy. We had even invited the CS to come. He couldn't come. You know, we'd invited Ndongo Gedenji from the parliamentary committee to come. He didn't turn up. You know, stuff. Okay. So let me just get. I think one of this approach that when we sit down to discuss security, that we've got to have a division between people who support government and people who don't, as opposed to discussing what the issues of security are. I think is problematic. I think that approach that unfortunately Gunjiri and he came with was problematic. And one last thing, the fact that in a debate about security that's supposed to be, I mean, it's been taken, we had set aside 1.5 hours of primetime TV on NTV to discuss these issues, that the government would see fit to send its comms people, not its policy people, I think is a pointer to how seriously they take security.
All right, so you've considered to poor planning because that just speaks to terrible planning. But let me come to Latif, hearing what he has to say, that when you're talking about such serious conversations, there shouldn't be pro, anti in terms of security. It's just comments, opinions, and moving the discussion forward. Do you agree with Munjiri or with Patrick?
I agree with both, and I think in this particular instance, the way it comes out, we had a communication problem. Kadara is saying they had 2 channels of communication. That's a problem, you know, because from the organization point, it was not clear exactly what this discussion is going to be about. And maybe that's what would also make people like Domo Gebenji not want to come, because it's not clear what am I coming to discuss. Now, I agree also with Kadara when he says that such a conversation should not be adversarial. It should never be. It's about the country. And I think if you want to have such a conversation, then you also must consider 2 things. That there are people who are advocating one side and the other people who are advocating the other side. I mean, if you want to have both sides of a conversation, then you need to balance both sides. So Haki Africa and at Tango Chesoni, you probably know they advocate a certain stand. Then you have to also balance and bring in people who also say, come and say, however, like we are saying, the Constitution is where the problem is. So you have to bring people who actually come and say the Constitution is
again, this is what we endeavored to do, which was to bring on board people who've had opinions, discussions on this, and people who have expertise, you know, on this, so people who can speak to the human rights issues. I really don't buy, and let me go back again. I really don't buy this idea that if civil society is necessarily the anti-government thing, and that we should treat them that way.
It's not
I don't buy.
You invited Haki Focus because you know their stand.
No, I invited them to speak on behalf, because as people who've worked in this area.
But also, you
Let
know
him
their
finish.
stand.
Right.
On this particular issue, you know what they stand for.
Right.
At Sangwa Chesoni is actually multifaceted. First of all, she was the vice chairperson of the Constitution Commission, so she knows what's contained in the Constitution.
Right.
But also, she stands from the human rights perspective, where she's a strong advocate on these issues. So those two will definitely speak the same language.
Right.
Then you also need to have people who come and say, look, at Sangwa, the Constitution that you gave us is where the problem is.
That's why we invite government. That's why we invite IPOA.
So, Gunjuri, let's end this with, do you still maintain the position that media was creating? Because now you know the organizers...
Yes, and let me explain why. And Eric has been very, very clear on trying. You see, when you have particular people, for example, nobody's talking about Andrew Franklin. Franklin has been on TV on numerous occasions explaining how this government has no idea how to deal with security. So you already have 3 people whose public positions on this issue are clear. You have Haki Africa that has been closed down by government because of being allegations on it. You have Sangwa Chesoni, who's been very clear about government trampling human rights. You have Andrew Franklin, who's been very clear about government not being able to handle security. And then you want to respond to these 3 people with a government official.
Or with a softie like Nojiri.
Or a softie like me. Really? You know what I'm saying? So you need
point has been made across the board. We've had you, we've had everybody. We need to
it
move
was
this
being
forward.
made.
Okay.
So news was being made.
News was being made.
News was being made.
Okay. Let's talk about corruption. Mumo Matemu yesterday resigns. This has now left the commission empty, vacant. Nobody in there. The secretariat, however, is still working. Coverage of corruption in Kenya. We were talking about this earlier with my colleague Michael, that sometimes it feels like you could have a script set aside to cover this after several other years in terms of the people who rise to the helm of then was CASA, now EACC, in that they'll in some way be hounded or jump out of office, be hounded out of office. Eric, do we cover this story in as far as seeking to find what really ails the country, what really is at the heart of the problem and what we're grappling with when it comes to corruption? Or do we just report, okay, Mumo has resigned. All right, ESC, what's his name? Bomet governor appeared at the Integrity Center for questioning. Are we just covering, reporting?
A blank answer, yes.
Okay.
That's what we are doing. I think, and this is where we have to get some self-criticism as media, is when we, for example, come up and start saying, you know, there's trouble brewing in the EACC, we are not going further to see what's this trouble, what's happening, and who are the forces at play. And one of the reasons, of course, you know, is because in the newsrooms, you will know, you'll hear names, you'll hear this is what's happening, this is what could be happening. You know, there's a lot of undercurrent, but we don't want to talk about it because of court cases, libel, and all these things, and also because you cannot really prove. Now, it's important that sometimes, you know, we need to go in deeper and investigate further and say, and come out and say, you know what, the problem is emanating from A, B, C, D. But like our Editors Guild chairman, Linus Kekai, said, we have my people, your people problem. We have a my people, your people problem in newsrooms.
Okay. Gadara?
Okay, very quickly, I'll just respond very quickly to something
let's
that...
move on.
No, I am. It's just because you mentioned Andrew, and it's important that we clear the air that Andrew Franklin has been in this country for 34 years, you know, and he talks a lot about security.
And he has
He's
been
an
on this
expert
show
in it,
times.
and he's been here before. I think he speaks to the issues of security, and it's rather unfair to simply paint him as somebody who comes in with the aim of criticizing government.
Gotcha.
I don't think that's
Which
actually
he
true.
does.
You know, he might end up doing it, but I think he speaks to the issues, and I think it's something government needs to take on board. On the resignation of Matemu and the fight against corruption, I think I wasn't surprised that he resigned. I think after his deputy one, it wasn't.
It was coming.
Yeah, it was coming. You know.
Our coverage.
I think in terms of our coverage, we really need to go back and start looking at why these things don't work. You know, why is it that all the commissions we've had, from the first CASA all the way down to the EACC now, that the fruits of this or the product of this has been very minimal. I don't think we have gotten value for our money. You know, I argued in the case of CAS and its former director that, I mean, when we're paying somebody 2 million shillings a month, you know, and he keeps promising
So
big
that they're
fish,
incorruptible,
you know, and
the argument is we give them 2 million shillings so that they become incorruptible.
yeah, actually that's true. You know, and one thing we should have learned from our MPs is that paying people more doesn't make them incorruptible. Because the system the system that we have incentivizes them to be corrupt.
Yes. Okay.
The problem is systemic, and we need to go down and ask. By changing Matemu and getting somebody else won't give us much mileage.
Okay.
You know, in the end, unless we change the actual system that incentivizes the behavior of public officers.
And can the media help with just breaking this down, investigating further, helping Kenyans and everybody understand what the problems are? Or is the dice already cast, you know, let's just cover what we can, this will sort itself out?
I think it's twofold. One, the media, we have a media that is in a hurry. Rarely do we do in-depth stories anymore. And the ones that get done take a couple of weeks and come as documentaries or features. We don't do investigate. I don't see investigative.
Well, KTN did Graft Diaries.
Well, yeah. But see, what I'm saying is that it comes as documentaries. It's not. It's set aside as a feature rather than news. For okay, maybe I'm doing semantics. Feature and news are more or less the same.
Semantics.
Yes, semantics. The problem we're having is that we don't, as Eric said, we don't have media that goes into the why of something happening. We always talk about the what that is happening and the how it is happening, the when it is happening. We never talk about the why. For example, nobody has ever tried to draw a line between Matemu all the way to, what's the first guy? Wow. How is it that nobody, in fact, that's a job I don't want. So guys are lobbying for appointment. That's a job. It would be, you know, you don't want that job because for sure you're going to leave.
Suffer the same fate.
You're going to leave. And somebody in media should have actually made this story. What is it that ails that top office at the Anti-Corruption Authority? How is it that everybody from PLO, Ringera, Matemu, everybody goes in looking very clean, comes out looking very dirty?
I think I've seen that story done.
For everyone, because you see,
yes, drawing the linkages.
It's now becoming an event. The resignation of the...
It's a when.
The resignation of the chairperson of the Anti-Corruption Authority is now an event. You will have an appointment and you will have a resignation. So it's just a matter of when.
I think also, let's not also be very critical of the media. The media is a reflection of the general society. And I keep saying that this society, especially our generation and the generation of our parents, we are rotten. We're just gone. We are totally corrupt. Look, the reason why we are saying, the reason why we do not want to delve deeper, we know we can. It's not that we have incapacity to delve deeper into these things. We know we can delve deeper into these things. Why aren't we doing it? Because there are strings attached. Because as a society, we are corrupt. Because individually, we are feeling corrupt. You do not want to go and rock the boat. Somebody comes in and is appointed as EACC boss. There are people who sit and look at him and they're like, bring his file, and they look and see how am I going to influence this person, or actually how do I plant Gunjiri Wambogo to be the EACC director. He'll last for 2 years. By that time we'll move on.
Okay.
I think I mean, one of the things that I really disagree with is this, the idea that the guys up there are corrupt or the media is not doing its job because it exists.
He's not saying the guys up there, he's saying everybody.
The entire society.
The entire society, you and I.
Yeah, you know, that somehow we are all to blame for the fact that a few guys on top, and don't forget a few guys on top who are making real money.
It is not a few guys.
Most of the, no, actually it is. No. And let me tell you why I say this. Grand corruption, which we need to distinguish from petty corruption.
How?
Let me tell you how. Let me tell you how.
How do you distinguish one corruption from the other?
Yeah, but let me explain.
Like a big
and small if you give me time and actually explain how and why we distinguish it.
We are going to we are discussing now corruption, which we can, this is not the forum. Well, media, we need to move on. I have 5 minutes. Briefly.
But he's made the point, so it needs to be counted. The fact is, grand corruption that we have, the golden bags and things, it does not stream from policemen extorting money, which is a lot of what they do, from taxi drivers, etc. You know, that is a model within government that comes from the structure of government itself, that government is there essentially to enrich people.
It is aspirational.
It does not grow. That government that did not grow from you and me.
Let
me
finish.
finish.
Aspiring.
Let me finish.
He's
you
aspiring.
and I don't aspire to be an MP.
To graduate into grand corruption.
No. Actually, no. And this is what I'm saying. Is
not
to say
person,
that government,
Okay.
and its corruption somehow springs from the corruption of society, I think is a lie. If anything, that
doesn't
corruption
this small
is what
person and
drives.
small corruption, when they get into
it
this
is not-
big office,
look at
then
his
continue
history.
to
Actually,
propagate
no.
the same?
No, Kenyatta was corrupt. You know, the elder Kenyatta, he didn't start as a policeman or a meter reader extorting from his people.
But you see,
he got into government as a person who fought for it.
All right, let
Look
us
at the
move on.
guys who
Gentlemen,
got in 2002.
Patrick, you've made your point. I'll have to stop you there because I have 5 minutes and we have to come back to media coverage. These are issues we will converse tomorrow on the State of the Nation. We shall have you back, I think, to talk more about this. But two key stories I want us to talk about. One is the not more than 2/3 rule, and a lot has been said about that. We've seen the women come out. Ngunjiri, in terms of the issues around this, and also just comparisons with whether it has worked elsewhere in the world, what has been done to mitigate when such issues have arisen. Has the media done a good job?
Of what, explaining it?
Explaining it, telling the story?
No.
No?
No. They haven't done a good job of telling the story. And also, we are focusing on the sensationalism. So we are talking about the speaker and the position that he made, and we ran that story in all our media. And then we see, and that is, in fact, I saw somebody saying that was his opinion. And then it became like policy.
Well, he's just not some person walking in the streets, he's a speaker.
But you see, the people who responded to him were also members of parliament, a whole team of them. And again, that is not just people walking in the streets. But you see, we're putting emphasis on, he had a position, the former Prime Minister had a position. We are focusing on the sensational, the personalities speaking this. We're not focusing on, first and foremost, the reason that the gender rule was actually put in the Constitution. The context of how practical it is, especially with the experience of what we've seen in the last 2 years, the challenges that the current women legislators are having, that is making them look like they don't do any job, in terms of they have no budgets, And then you see, we're not looking at that. We are looking at the sensational aspects of the conversation.
So, Eric, in justice to that story, you'd say?
You know, he wrote an article which was aptly titled, "The media should not make the news." Right?
Yes.
And now he's saying that we should make the news.
No, you should explain. No, you should explain
the newsmakers,
the narratives.
The newsmakers, I agree with the explanation of the narratives. But if the newsmakers are not themselves explaining the narrative, then we end up getting lost. It's true that, for example, when Speaker Justin Muturi talked about, you know, his proposal to have a cap of 100, we should have gone to explain. Instead of just saying the Speaker is proposing the removal of 47 nominated women, we should explain that the Speaker is proposing a cap of 100 special seats, which will be elected in a special way. We should have gone that way, because up to now, actually, even until he wrote a piece in the Sunday Nation, it wasn't clear what exactly Speaker Justin Muturi wants. And when you read that piece, you can see, he has a point. Well, the point may not be strong, but he has a point. And that's the point we should have dealt with. Now, when you say that, you know, the following day we come up with a headline, Raila has said he's going to lead a demonstration, and we say women MPs are saying he should step aside from that seat on the day of the debate. I agree, we are going the sensationalism, but it's because the newsmakers are choosing to be completely shallow on this issue.
So are the women themselves?
The women leaders. I have a problem with Kewopa. Kewopa came into this, they had one job to do. Main job as elected women leaders is to make sure that we mainstream the issue of gender, we make sure that we have a formula that works, we make sure that future parliaments shall have at least 1/3. Should be more, but at least 1/3. What did they do? Kept quiet. This is the time they're drafting a bill.
Yeah, jumping up.
Well, first I'll say I don't think that the gender issue is a women's issue. I think the entirety of our parliament should have been engaged, and I think we should be asking the question why it's taken 5 years, you know, and why that over the period from when they got into office, actually not 5, it's not 5 years. It's about 3.
It's 2.5.
It's 2.5.
2.5 years. Why we knew this deadline was coming. It was there, it was set, you know. The Supreme Court had issued an opinion saying that 27th is a date by which you need to have a bill. Don't forget, it is not a deadline for having a third of women in parliament, a third of any gender in parliament, but it is very much to have a bill. And it was essentially ignored till the deadline is here, you know, and we are acting as if we didn't know, you know, as if it's caught people by surprise.
Breaking story.
I think we need to put a spotlight. I've seen that they've now talked about extending it till next year. I'm not sure what the law says about that, whether they're going to change the law. So
no, they're allowed to.
The AG said they can extend.
Okay. All right, fine. So if they can, then that's great, you know. But what do we do in the meantime?
We wait until the next.
Are we going to wait till next year?
Of course we will.
You know, and then we remember it. You know, or are we going to, as media, keep this alive, you know, and push and ensure that the bills are actually.
And just not the media, as Eric was saying, the women need to keep it alive, the Kewopa and others, because it's one thing for the media to cover, but
they are the champions.
But
every cause
let me tell you why I have a problem with it being painted as a women's issue. It's the women to push it. You know, I think that lends itself to being marginalized. As we know, it is no. I mean, the parliament is dominated by men. You know, and if they think that that is a problem just for the women, let them go and talk about it and stuff. Actually, it shouldn't be. It should be our men and our leadership actually in parliament that we should be putting on a spotlight and saying, what are you guys doing? This is a constitutional requirement.
Our women leaders, the current crop of women leaders that we have in parliament, 16 plus 47, they are seriously good women leaders. They are good in advocating issues. They are very good at trying to convince people. They should have taken the last 2.5 years just going to their male folk and convincing them this is why.
Because they're the champions of this one.
This is how we go.
Every
cause must have
why do they need
champion.
to be convinced to do something that they are constitutionally
because of
mandated
the society, the dynamics, the patriarchal nature of how things have panned out in the past. But let's move on to page 3 of the Standard today. Has this practical joke or spin job gone Ori, Chepkwony and Ruto seated when the president is standing in Bomet? So this started off on social media, made it to some mainstream media as well.
It's a bit upsetting.
Your thoughts on this one, Gunjuri?
See, this is again a problem. And unfortunately, I'm still stuck about whether that was a real picture or not, because we've got Chepkwony coming up and claiming and insisting that that picture wasn't correct, that he actually was not seated next to Isaac Ruto. He was sitting at the back. So he insists it was Photoshop. It's
Photoshop.
Yeah, and nobody has actually challenged him on that point. But then we already have this story running even in mainstream media as a story. We had yesterday, I remember listening to one of the media FM stations asking whether they were being disrespectful. So they've gone beyond whether the authenticity of the picture to whether what they did was correct or not. We haven't even confirmed that this picture was authentic.
Eric is an editor. Is this picture really not? What is this?
Look, it's an event. How long was the president on that podium? Very long. Was there any point when Chepkwony came and sat next to Isaac Ruto? There are pictures that are showing them seated together. I do not think you can Photoshop that and remove the deputy speaker from here and put her in the next table, in the next seat, and then in another photo you bring her back.
So was he seated were they seated at some point when the president was speaking and everybody else was standing?
Yes, at some point, yes. You know, people stand at different levels and different intervals. Whatever was happening there, I do not understand. But I think I have seen these pictures, and I think I've seen pictures where Chepkwony is sitting at the back and Chepkwony is sitting at the front. And at some point they're standing, some point they're sitting.
But at the picture where he's seated at the back, he has a different suit.
There's even...
It's true, just look.
No.
Where he's seated at the back, his suit is grey.
Is the president wearing the same?
So no, Chepkwony. Just look at those two pictures, by the way.
So you're telling me
I'm sitting and I'm thinking.
Chepkwony has photoshopped himself. Everybody else is dressed the same way, apart from Chepkwony? No, he's dressed the same way.
So that picture is real.
What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I haven't really followed the controversies, but I think some of these things kind of detract from the seriousness of the issues that we face. You know, whether they were seated. I'm not one who believes every time the president stands, everybody has to stand. You know, he's just a guy doing a job.
A guy doing a job?
That's all the presidency is. It's a job. He applied for it. Kenyans gave it to him. You know, so I'm not too enamored to the idea of sort of building them up and creating personality cults around them. That if they stand up, you know, everybody has to, etc. So for me, it's a storm in a teacup.
to be honest.
All right. Before we go, my director, 1 minute, just want your thoughts on Burundi. Because the leadership, we have President Uhuru Kenyatta expected to travel to Tanzania today, meet other leaders, discuss what's happening there. But in the country, and as far as media is concerned, a number of, I think, radio stations, one independent, has been shut down. And I've been seeing a lot of them taking to other international media interviews, just talking about what's going on there and the clampdown. Your thoughts, Eric?
Well, it's always wrong when a regime decides that to clamp down the media is the best way. I think it's wrong unless they can come and say that this media was directly inciting people and saying go out on the street, which I do not know. I don't have that evidence. But I think it would be wrong to start clamping down on the media. And unfortunately, again, is the story now starts coming to they are even shutting down the media. We forget the main issue here. The main issue is the gentleman who is seeking a third term, which the people of this country had not agreed. And they're up in arms saying, no, don't.
All right, Gunjiri, finally?
Yeah, I think also I'll agree with Eric. We are losing focus of what the story is here. The story here is that we are looking at a country that could very easily tear itself apart. Yeah? The situation has moved from being political competition to actually being the emergence of a civil war.
Yeah.
People are dying. This could be a Rwanda coming back together again, and we are all watching from the sideline and talking about the sideshows, about a policeman being beaten because he shot someone, about the media being closed down. Nobody's actually saying that hundreds of people are actually being killed nearly on a daily basis.
And this is happening in Burundi. Do you see such a thing happening in Kenya? Clampdowns?
Well, if you are to link the two, you have to really see the irony of the president talking about free, fair elections in Burundi and not looking back at what happened in 2013 and what we are doing to fix it so it doesn't repeat in 2017. But that said, I think it's important. It's good now that EAC seems to have to be taking this a bit seriously. I think they've come very late in the game. It was quite clear from way back that Nkurunziza was looking to run, and they should have put their foot down from way before to say that this would not be allowed. It's, the violation of the Arusha Accords, which are really what has helped Burundi stay together. And this is going to be a regional problem. Don't forget, we now have huge numbers of refugees crossing the border into Rwanda, into Tanzania, which is going to be destabilizing for this other country. So it's not just a Burundian problem, and I think we've come late to the game, but we need to get serious about it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. We must end it there. Patrick Gadara, who's a communications consultant. He's a cartoonist. You will find his work in the Daily Nation, a blogger as well. Also with us, Ngunjiri Wambogo, who's a political commentator. Eric Latif, an editor with the Capital FM. Also judge at the presenter. How's that going?
Well, it's getting to the last. We're actually going to the penultimate now. Yeah? Hoping we can get very good, well, we have very good candidates so far. Yeah. Very good candidates. So we just want now the audience to vote. To vote for their best. I was at the university the other day and they were saying, I hope you're voting. She's from our school. Vote for so-and-so. So everyone is all about voting for the presenter. That's what should happen. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. That's where we'll wrap up the newsroom this morning. A number of stories we've been able to discuss this morning. And of course, the conversation continues online. I'm seeing Senator also tweeting and saying the letter he received for that meeting we were talking about earlier, Senator Hassan Omar of Mombasa County. He was part of the group. He said it's in the audience. He said it read security and freedom and security. Ngunjiri, freedom versus security. All right, a conversation for another day. Let's get some international news. Shortly, Michael Gitonga will be taking over for a lifestyle segment. Today on relationships, we're talking about the parents and when they're being concerned, advising you vis-a-vis meddling with your business. But first, international news. But I understand, let's first take a commercial break. We'll be back shortly.